The dim glow of neon signs flickered across the rain-slicked parking lot of O'Malley's Bar, a forgotten outpost on the edge of a dusty highway town where the wind howled like forgotten regrets. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of stale beer and cigarette smoke, the kind that clung to leather jackets and hardened souls. It was a place for wanderers, for men like Jacob Harlan, the toughest biker in the county, whose scarred knuckles and tattooed arms told stories of bar fights and back-road brawls. Jacob nursed a whiskey at the corner table, his broad shoulders hunched, eyes distant as if chasing ghosts from a war long buried. He hadn't cried since he was a boy, not even when the shrapnel took his hearing in one ear, or when his brother's bike exploded in a plume of fire on a rain-soaked curve. Promises broken, that's what life had become for him, until that night. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold rain and the faint patter of drops on the wooden floor. In stumbled a girl, no more than 16, her dark hair plastered to her face, clothes torn at the sleeves as if she'd clawed her way through thorns. She was deaf, that much was clear from the way she scanned the room with wide, frantic eyes, her hands signing desperately into the empty air. No one noticed at first. The jukebox blared an old country tune about lost love, drowning out the world. But then the three locals at the bar, roughnecks with grease-stained hands and sneers like switchblades, turned their heads. They'd been the ones outside, the whispers said later, cornering her after she wandered too far from the truck stop, mocking her silence, shoving her into the mud until she fought back with fists and fury. "Look at the freak," one of them slurred, his voice cutting through the music like a rusty blade. He stood, knocking over his stool, and the others followed, circling her like wolves. The girl backed against the wall, her chest heaving, but no sound escaped her lips, only the raw terror in her eyes, pleading for someone, anyone, to see her. She signed again, faster now, her fingers a blur. "Help. Please." The men laughed, and grabbing her arm, twisting it just enough to make her wince. The bar fell into a hush, patrons averting their eyes, knowing better than to tangle with the local crew who ran the backroom bets and owed favors to shadier folks up the chain. Jacob's glass paused midway to his lips. He'd seen enough injustice in his 40 years, enough to build walls around his heart thicker than the chrome on his Harley, but something in her gaze pierced through, a mirror to the boy he'd once been, silenced by explosions and loss. He set the glass down with a deliberate thud, the sound echoing like a gavel. Rising slowly, his boots scraping the floorboards, he crossed the room in 3 strides, his shadow falling over the trio like an eclipse. "Let her go," he growled, voice low and gravelly, the words carrying the weight of a man who'd stared down death and walked away scarred. The leader turned, sizing him up with bleary eyes. "Mind your business, old man. This ain't your fight." But Jacob didn't flinch. His hand clamped on the man's wrist, twisting just enough to loosen his grip on the girl. She stumbled free, pressing against the bar, her breaths coming in silent gasps. The other two lunged, fists flying, but Jacob moved like the wind over desert dunes, efficient, unyielding. A punch connected with his jaw, splitting his lip, but he absorbed it, countering with a shove that sent one crashing into the stools. The fight was over in seconds, the men sprawled and groaning, the bartender yelling for them to take it outside. Jacob stood amid the chaos, blood trickling from his mouth, but his eyes never left the girl. She stared at him, trembling. Then her hands moved again, slower this time, forming words he couldn't read but felt in his bones. "Thank you." In that moment, something shifted in the air, thick as the storm outside. Jacob, the unbreakable biker who'd ridden alone for years, felt a crack in his armor. He nodded, wiping the blood with the back of his hand, and gestured toward the door. "Come on, kid. Let's get you out of here." As they stepped into the rain, the downpour washing the grime from her face, he realized this wasn't just a rescue. It was a pull, A thread from his past unraveling, a promise he'd made to his brother under a blood moon, to protect the voiceless, the ones the world forgot. And tonight, it had found its voice in her silence. The girl, her name was Lily, she signed later with a shy flicker of her fingers, followed him to his bike, the massive black Harley gleaming under the street lamp like a faithful steed. Jacob handed her his helmet, too big for her small frame, and she clutched it like a lifeline. The engine roared to life, a thunderous heartbeat that vibrated through their bones, drowning the distant sirens as the locals' friends no doubt called for backup. They tore down the highway, rain stinging their faces, the world blurring into streaks of red taillights and endless blacktop. Lily's arms wrapped around his waist, her grip fierce, and for the first time in years, Jacob felt the weight of another soul against his back, not a burden, but a reminder. They pulled into a roadside motel an hour later, the kind with flickering vacancy signs and the faint smell of mildew. Jacob paid for 2 rooms with cash from his worn wallet, no questions asked. In the dim lobby light, Lily signed her story haltingly, abandoned by her trucker father months ago, drifting from town to town, surviving on scraps and silence. The men tonight weren't the first. They'd cornered her for sport, seeing her deafness as weakness. But she had a gift, she tried to convey, her hands dancing like flames, a song she composed in her mind, notes that no one could hear but her, a melody born from pain that she poured into drawings and whispers to the wind. Jacob listened, or tried to, his partial deafness making him strain for every gesture. He thought of his own scars, the explosion that stole half his hearing and all his faith in promises. His brother Daniel had died clutching a locket with their mother's photo, whispering, "Watch out for the quiet ones, Jake. They're the strongest." That vow had faded with time, buried under miles of road and empty bottles, but now, watching Lily's eyes light with fragile hope, it resurfaced, sharp as shrapnel. "You're safe now," he said, his voice rough but steady, "whatever it takes." As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds, they sat on the motel's sagging porch. Lily pulled a small notebook from her bag, sketching furiously, lines that curved into what looked like sheet music, a silent symphony of sorrow and strength. She tore out the page and pressed it into his hand, her fingers lingering. Jacob unfolded it, the pencil strokes raw and beautiful, evoking the roar of engines and the hush of desert nights. For the first time, tears welled in his eyes, unbidden, tracing hot paths down his weathered cheeks. He didn't hide them. In the quiet before the world woke, they were just 2 souls bound by unspoken words. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. Word of the bar fight spread like wildfire through the biker networks, pulling old allies from the shadows, veterans like him, bound by codes older than the roads they rode. Lily's silent song wasn't just notes on paper, it was a call to arms, a promise that would rally a crew of 50 hardened riders against a web of corruption that stretched from small-town thugs to crooked officials preying on the vulnerable. Jacob wiped his face, folding the paper carefully. "We'll make this right," he murmured, the words a vow renewed. And as the sun broke free, they mounted the bike once more, heading into the light, toward redemption, one silent note at a time. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the motel's cracked asphalt as Jacob and Lily finished a sparse breakfast of black coffee and day-old donuts from a vending machine. The air carried the sharp tang of wet earth mixed with the faint exhaust from passing semis, a reminder that the highway never slept. Jacob's jaw still ached from the previous night's scuffle, a dull throb that pulsed with each heartbeat, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the girl across from him. Lily's fingers traced patterns on the table's scarred surface, her eyes distant, as if replaying the notes of her silent song in her mind. She hadn't spoken a word, couldn't, in the way most understood, but her presence filled the space with an unspoken urgency. Jacob leaned back in the rickety chair, the wood creaking under his weight. He'd called an old contact that morning, a gravel-voiced mechanic named Ethan from the Iron Oath crew, the remnants of the motorcycle club he'd ridden with after the war. "Trouble in town," he'd said into the burner phone, keeping it vague. Ethan's reply was a low chuckle followed by, "On my way, brother. Sounds like you've got that look in your eye again, the one that means promises are calling." Jacob hung up without more words. Trust like theirs didn't need elaboration. Now, as Lily sketched another fragment of her melody in her notebook, he felt the pull of that old vow to his brother Daniel strengthening, like a chain tightening around his chest. Protect the quiet ones. It wasn't just words anymore. It was a map leading them forward. They hit the road again by mid-morning, the Harley's engine growling to life with a vibration that Lily felt more than heard, her hands gripping Jacob's jacket as they merged onto the endless ribbon of blacktop. The landscape shifted from the motel's drab outskirts to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and rusted silos, the kind of forgotten Americana where secrets festered like open wounds. Jacob's partial deafness turned the world into a muffled symphony. The wind's roar a distant hum, the occasional blare of a horn, more a felt pressure than sound. But Lily's occasional taps on his side, signaling turns or pauses, cut through clearly, a Morse code of survival. An hour in, they pulled off at a dusty overlook, the bike's tires crunching gravel as Jacob killed the engine. Below them stretched a valley where a small town huddled against the horizon, its main street lined with faded storefronts and a sheriff's station that looked more like a bunker than a beacon of justice. Lily dismounted first, her legs unsteady, and pointed toward the cluster of buildings, her hands forming urgent signs. There, home, but not safe. Jacob followed her gaze, squinting against the glare. She'd explained fragments last night. Her father, a long-haul driver named Marcus, had vanished weeks ago after crossing paths with the wrong crowd. Whispers of unpaid debts, shady deals at the local mill, and officials turning blind eyes. The men from the bar were just the surface. Beneath lurked a network that preyed on the isolated, silencing voices before they could rise. As they stood there, the low rumble of approaching engines echoed up the hill, not one but a dozen Harleys, cresting the rise like a steel tide. Ethan led the pack, his salt and pepper beard whipping in the wind, flanked by riders Jacob recognized from dusty reunions, grizzled veterans with club patches, faded but unbroken, women like Sarah who handled the medkits and mapped the routes, all bound by oaths forged in foxholes and fire. They pulled up in a loose semicircle, engines idling to a collective purr that vibrated the ground. Ethan dismounted, clapping Jacob on the shoulder with a nod toward Lily. "Heard about the bar? You always did pick the fights worth winning." His eyes softened as Lily stepped forward, her notebook clutched like a shield. She hesitated, then opened it, flipping to the page of her silent song, the swirling lines that captured isolation's ache and resilience's fire. The group gathered closer, the scent of leather and motor oil mingling with the dry sagebrush. Ethan traced a finger over the sketch, his weathered face creasing. "What's this, kid? Music for the road?" Lily nodded, her hands demonstrating, a conductor shaping invisible notes, mimicking the throttle's twist, the wheels turn, the heart's defiant beat. One by one, the riders leaned in, their tough exteriors cracking as the raw emotion in her gestures hit home. Sarah, a former nurse with scars from the same war that had marked Jacob, murmured, "It's like she hears what we feel but can't say." Jacob watched, his throat tight, the song's essence stirring memories of Daniel's last ride, the promise exchanged under stars that seemed to listen. But the moment shattered as dust clouds billowed from the valley road, 3 black SUVs barreling up the incline, tires spitting gravel. The lead vehicle braked hard, doors slamming open to reveal suits that screamed authority gone sour. The sheriff's deputies, badges glinting falsely under the sun, accompanied by the same roughnecks from the bar, nursing bruises and grudges. The leader, a stocky man with a badge pinned crookedly, Deputy Harlan, no relation, but the name twisted like a knife, stepped forward, hand hovering near his holster. "Harlan!" he barked at Jacob, ignoring the circle of bikes. "That girl's trouble. Hand her over and we forget the disturbance last night. She's got ties to mill business we don't need stirring up." Jacob's stance widened, a wall of muscle and resolve. The crew shifted subtly, engines revving in warning, a low thunder that even his dulled ears caught. Lily shrank back, but her eyes flashed defiance, hands signing to Jacob. "No. Truth." He nodded once, voice steady as forged steel. "She's under my protection. Whatever business you're protecting, it ends here." The deputy sneered, signaling his men. But the bikers held firm. No drawn weapons, just the unyielding line of loyalty, a family chosen in the face of corruption's shadow. Tension hung thick, the air electric with unspoken threats, as the first hints of a larger storm brewed. Records of Marcus's disappearance buried in ledgers, officials pocketing bribes from the mill's owners who exploited drifters like Lily's father. In that standoff, under the relentless sun, Jacob felt the weight of his brother's promise solidify. This wasn't just about one girl, it was a reckoning for the voiceless, a silent song rising to challenge the roar of injustice. As the deputies hesitated, sensing the tide turning, Ethan leaned in. "Ride with us, Jacob. We'll uncover what they hide." Lily's hand found his, a silent anchor, and together they mounted up, the convoy forming ranks. The engines roared as one, drowning the deputies' shouts, carrying them toward the town below, not as invaders, but as guardians awakening to a fight that demanded honor over haste. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The convoy thundered into the small town's outskirts like a living storm, the collective growl of engines reverberating off the weathered facades of clapboard houses and the looming silhouette of the old mill on the river's edge. Dust swirled in their wake, a hazy veil that caught the midday sun and turned the air golden, thick with the scent of sun-baked asphalt and wild mustard blooming along the roadside. Jacob rode at the front, Lily's small form pressed against his back, her fingers occasionally tapping a rhythm on his side, a silent Morse code of reassurance amid the chaos. The deputies' SUVs had peeled off after the standoff, tails between their legs, but Jacob knew better than to trust the retreat. Shadows like that didn't fade, they regrouped, slithering back stronger. They pulled up to a nondescript diner on the town's frayed main street, the kind of place where the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and the booths held secrets etched into vinyl seats. Ethan signaled the stop with a gloved fist raised high, and the bikes shut down one by one, their silence sudden and heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the mill's machinery grinding away like a mechanical heartbeat. The crew dismounted, a dozen strong now, their leather vests patched with faded emblems of the Iron Oath, symbols of bonds forged in the heat of desert patrols and the cold grip of loss. Sarah, with her sharp eyes and steady hands, helped Lily off the bike, offering a gentle smile that bridged the gap of words. Lily responded with a nod, her hands fluttering in quick signs of gratitude, the notebook tucked under her arm like a talisman. Inside the diner, the air was cooler, laced with the aroma of frying onions and fresh-brewed joe, the jukebox murmuring a low blues tune that Jacob felt more in his chest than heard. They claimed the back corner, a strategic huddle away from prying eyes, the waitresses casting wary glances but saying nothing. Small-town folk knew when to mind their own. Ethan slid into the booth across from Jacob, his calloused hands wrapping around a mug as he leaned in. "That deputy, Harlan's got the sheriff's ear, and the sheriff's got the mill's pockets. Word from my sources. Your girl's dad, Marcus, wasn't just a driver. He hauled loads that weren't on any manifest, stuff the mill's owners used to cut corners, poison the river quiet-like. He found out, tried to walk away. Now he's gone, and they're painting him as a runner to cover tracks." Jacob's jaw tightened, the ache from last night's blow flaring as he processed the words through the filter of his partial deafness, reading Ethan's lips and the subtle shifts in tone. Lily sat beside him, her eyes wide, hands clenched in her lap as she absorbed the fragments Jacob relayed in simple gestures he'd picked up from old field signs during the war. The silent song in her notebook suddenly felt heavier, its notes a map to buried truths. She flipped it open, pointing to a section where the lines twisted like river currents, then signed emphatically, "Father knew, tried to protect me. They took him." A murmur rippled through the crew, faces hardening. Veterans like Noah, a wiry ex-Marine with a limp from an IED, and Tyler, broad-shouldered and quiet, who nodded slowly, his own ghosts stirring. Sarah reached across, her voice soft but firm. "We've seen this before. Corruption eating the edges of places like this. Mills dumping waste, officials looking the other way for a cut. Marcus probably threatened to talk, and now they're circling his daughter to shut it down." She glanced at Lily, who met her gaze with a fierce spark, hands moving to sketch a quick symbol, a locked mouth breaking free. The group leaned closer, the diner's hum fading as they pieced together the puzzle. Jacob felt the old promise to Daniel coil tighter in his gut, that vow under the blood moon to stand for the overlooked, the ones whose cries the world muffled. He'd buried it deep after the war, after the explosion that left him half-deaf and his brother in ashes. But Lily's silence had unearthed it, raw and insistent. As plates of greasy eggs and bacon arrived, untouched by most, Ethan pulled out a crumpled map from his saddlebag, spreading it across the table. The mill sat at the town's heart, a hulking beast of rusted iron and smokestacks belching faint grey plumes, fed by the river that snaked through the valley. "Entrance is here," he tapped. "Guarded loose during shifts. We ride in quiet. Scout for records, ledgers, manifests, anything tying the sheriff to the payoffs. No guns, no noise, just eyes and loyalty." The crew murmured agreement, a pact sealed in nods and shared glances, the family they'd chosen knitting tighter against the fray. Lily watched, her fingers itching to contribute, and she began tracing routes on the map's edge with a diner pencil, curves that echoed her song's rhythm, intuitive paths avoiding the main roads where deputies patrolled. But as the planning deepened, the diner's door swung open with a chime that cut through Jacob's haze like a warning bell. In walked two figures, the deputy from the Overlook, Harlan, his badge catching the light like a false promise, flanked by a slick-suited man from the mill, tall, with a predatory smile and eyes like polished stones. They scanned the room, zeroing in on the booth, the air thickening with unspoken threats. Harlan's hand rested casually on his belt, near the holster, while the suit adjusted his tie, voice oily as he approached. "Gentlemen and lady," he nodded at Sarah and Lily. "This is private property. Time to move along before things get complicated." Jacob rose slowly, his bulk casting a shadow over the table, the crew tensing behind him like coiled springs. Lily's hand found his under the table, a silent squeeze of resolve. "We're just eating," Jacob said, voice low and even. The words, carrying the gravel of roads, travelled too long. "Unless you've got a problem with that." The deputy smirked, stepping closer, but Ethan stood too, the group forming a subtle wall. No aggression, just unyielding presence, the scent of leather and resolve filling the space. The suit's eyes flicked to Lily, lingering too long, and she shrank back, but Jacob caught it. The promise in his veins igniting. "Touch her story. You touch all of us," he growled. The words a line drawn in the diner's worn linoleum. Tension crackled, the jukebox skipping a beat as if holding its breath. Harlan's fingers twitched toward his radio, but Sarah's calm voice cut through. "We're veterans, Deputy. We know about protecting what's right." "Care to explain why a father's gone missing under your watch?" The question hung, poetic justice in its simplicity, forcing the men to hesitate. Whispers from other patrons stirred, locals who'd long suffered the mill's shadow, now watching with quiet hope. The suit pulled Harlan back, murmuring something about "not here," and they retreated, the door chiming their exit like a defeated echo. The crew exhaled as one, but Jacob knew the reprieve was temporary. Lily's eyes met his, hands signing, "Closer now. Song leads us." He nodded, folding the map, the weight of redemption settling like dust after a ride. As they mounted up again, engines firing in unison, the town seemed to watch, windows cracking open, faces peering from behind curtains. The convoy rolled toward the mill's shadow, not with fury, but with the steady honor of those who honored old oaths. In the vibration of the Harley beneath him, Jacob felt Daniel's presence, a muffled whisper urging him on. "Protect the quiet ones." And in Lily's silent song, carried on the wind, he heard the first notes of victory, a melody of truth rising against the grind of corruption. The mill loomed like a rusted sentinel against the late afternoon sky, its corrugated walls groaning under the weight of years and unchecked greed. The river below, churning with murky secrets that foamed white at the bends. The convoy eased to a halt on an overgrown service road flanking the property, hidden by a thicket of willows whose leaves whispered in the breeze, carrying the acrid bite of chemical runoff mingled with the earthy damp of the water. Jacob cut the engine first, the sudden quiet amplifying the distant clank of machinery, a mechanical dirge that even his muffled hearing registered as a vibration in his chest. Lily dismounted behind him, her sneakers sinking into the soft soil, eyes fixed on the structure with a mix of dread and determination, her notebook pressed against her chest like armor. Ethan signaled the group with a series of hand gestures honed from wartime silence, dividing them into pairs, scouts to circle the perimeter, watchers to cover the exits, and a core team to slip inside during the shift change. No one questioned the plan. The Iron Oath's bond was woven from such moments, trust earned in the haze of smoke and sand, now redirected toward a quieter battle. Sarah paired with Noah, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, while Tyler took point on the riverside, his broad frame melting into the shadows with surprising grace. Jacob glanced at Lily, who signed quickly, "I go with you. Song knows the way." He hesitated, the protective instinct from his brother's vow warring with her fierce spark, but nodded. "Stay close," he murmured, the words more felt than spoken in the hush. They moved like ghosts through the underbrush, the group's boots muffled by fallen leaves and the faint crunch of gravel under tire tracks long abandoned. The air grew heavier near the fence, laced with the metallic tang of rust and something sharper, waste seeping from unseen pipes into the soil. Jacob's partial deafness turned the world into a tapestry of sensations, the press of Lily's hand on his arm guiding him around a loose chain-link panel, the subtle shift of Ethan's weight beside him as they crouched low. Inside the fence, the yard sprawled with stacked crates and idle forklifts, their shadows stretching long in the declining sun, painting the ground in bars of gold and gloom. Shift change brought the cover they needed. A trickle of workers shuffling out, lunch pails swinging, their conversations a distant rumble Jacob read on their lips. Complaints about quotas, whispers of the boss's cut that hinted at deeper rot. The core team, Jacob, Ethan, Lily and Sarah, slipped toward a side door propped open for ventilation, the hinges squeaking faintly like a warning. Inside, the mill's belly was a labyrinth of conveyor belts and humming vats, the air thick with steam, and the oily scent of processed timber laced with illicit chemicals. Dim overhead lights buzzed, casting erratic flickers that danced across gauges and locked cabinets, turning the space into a cinematic maze of half-seen threats. Lily led them unerringly, her steps light and intuitive, as if her silent song mapped the corridors in her mind, curves and pauses mirroring the twists of pipework overhead. She pointed to a stairwell descending into the lower levels, hands signing, "Records down." Father saw. Jacob's heart pounded, a steady drum against his ribs, evoking memories of patrols where every shadow hid betrayal. They descended, the temperature dropping with each step, the air cooler and damper, carrying echoes of dripping water and the faint, muffled whir of generators. At the bottom, a row of offices huddled like forgotten dens, doors labeled with peeling stickers. Inventory, payroll, compliance. Ironic in its mockery, Ethan jimmied the lock on the compliance room with a tool from his vest, the click sharp in the stillness. Inside, fluorescent tubes hummed overhead, illuminating filing cabinets stuffed with yellowed folders and a desk cluttered with ledgers. Sarah stood watch at the door, her eyes scanning the hall, while Lily dove into the drawers, her fingers flying with purpose. Jacob and Ethan rifled through stacks, the paper rustling like dry leaves, revealing manifests for special hauls. Trucks logged under Marcus's name, destinations blurred, but routes circling the river's poisoned bends. "Here," Ethan breathed, pulling a folder thick with invoices, bribes disguised as consulting fees to the sheriff's office, signatures linking Deputy Harlan to the mill's owner, a shadowy figure named Victor Kane. But as Lily unearthed a personnel file, Marcus's photo staring out marked terminated voluntary. A beam of light sliced through the doorway, accompanied by the heavy tread of boots. "Freeze!" The voice was authoritative, laced with false bravado. Deputy Harlan himself, radio crackling at his belt, 2 mil security guards flanking him, their faces pale in the harsh glow of a flashlight. The air thickened, the scent of sweat and fear cutting through the musty documents. Harlan's eyes locked on Lily, a smirk twisting his features. "Told you she'd bring trouble. Hand over the girl and whatever you've touched, Harlan. This is trespassing on official ground." Jacob stepped forward, positioning himself between the deputy and Lily, his frame a barrier of leather and resolve. The crew tensed, Sarah's hand inching toward her bag, Ethan palming the folder, but no one moved to violence. Their fight was for truth, not blood. Lily clutched a single sheet she'd found, a scrawled note in Marcus's hand, warning of the dumps, dated just before his disappearance. Her hands trembled as she signed to Jacob. Proof. For him. The promise in her eyes mirrored Daniel's last gaze, igniting something fierce in Jacob's chest. "This ends the lies," he said, voice steady, holding up the evidence like a shield. "Marcus didn't run. You took him to silence what he knew." Harlan's face flushed, his hand dropping to his holster, but the guards hesitated, glancing between him and the intruders, doubt flickering in their eyes. Locals who knew the river's toll on their own families. The standoff stretched, seconds ticking like a countdown, the mill's distant grind underscoring the moral precipice. Ethan radioed the outer crew in a whisper. "Hold position, we've got the spark." Outside, engines idled softly, a reminder of the loyalty encircling them. Lily stepped beside Jacob, unfolding her notebook to the Silent Songs page, holding it out, not as a weapon, but an offering of raw truth, the lines evoking the river's cry, the father's unspoken plea. The deputy faltered, the weight of exposure cracking his facade. "You don't know what you're stirring," he snarled, but his voice wavered, the guards shifting uneasily. In that charged silence, Jacob felt the redemption uncoil, a vow fulfilled not in fury, but in the unyielding light of honor. They backed toward the exit, documents secured, Lily's song now a beacon guiding their retreat. As alarms began to wail faintly in the distance, the team burst into the fading daylight, mounting up with the precision of old comrades. The convoy roared to life, peeling away from the mill's grasp, carrying the evidence like a fragile flame. But Harlan's parting shout echoed, "This ain't over." Jacob glanced back, Lily's arms around him once more, knowing the real storm was just breaking, a clash of corruption against the quiet strength of chosen kin, one silent note at a time. If this story is touching your heart, hit that like button to show your support. The convoy surged forward like a serpent of steel, uncoiling from the mill's shadow, engines snarling in unison against the encroaching dusk that bled orange and indigo across the valley. Jacob gripped the handlebars tighter, the Harley's throttle responding with a throaty pulse that vibrated up his arms, a rhythm he felt deep in his bones, more than heard through his scarred ear. Lily clung to him, her small frame a steady anchor amid the wind's whip, her notebook secured in his saddlebag alongside the pilfered documents, the fragile keys to unraveling the web that had swallowed her father. Behind them, the mill's alarms wailed into the cooling air, a piercing keen that twisted like smoke, mingling with the acrid tang of exhaust and the faint chemical bite wafting from the riverbanks. Ethan rode flank, his bike weaving close enough for Jacob to catch glimpses of his determined profile, salt and pepper beard slicing through the rush. The rest of the Iron Oath crew fanned out in formation, Sarah and Noah bringing up the rear, Tyler scouting ahead on a parallel path through the scrub-dotted hills. No one spoke over the roar. Communication came in flashes of headlights and gloved signals. A language born of battles where words could cost lives. The road twisted sharply, gravel spitting under tires as they evaded the main highway, where deputies might already be setting traps. Jacob's mind raced with fragments of the standoff below, the deputies' faltering snarl, the guards' uneasy shifts, the weight of Marcus's note in Lily's trembling hands. It was proof, yes, but proof ignited fires, and fires drew hunters. As the sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the horizon, the first signs of pursuit emerged. Distant flashes of blue lights flickering like false stars on the ridge behind them. 2 patrol cars, then 3, their sirens a muffled howl that Jacob sensed more as a pressure wave rippling through the air. "They're on us," Ethan signaled, pointing back with a rigid arm. The crew tightened ranks, accelerating into the gathering twilight, the landscape blurring into a montage of faded billboards and skeletal trees lining forgotten back roads. Lily tapped Jacob's side urgently. 2 quick beats, then a pause, her way of saying, "Hold on." And he nodded into the wind, the promise to Daniel echoing like a ghost rider at his shoulder. Protect the quiet ones, no matter the cost. They veered onto a narrow dirt track, the kind that hugged sheer drops into dry creek beds, dust clouds billowing in their wake like veils to obscure the trail. The patrol cars followed, engines straining as they bounced over ruts, but the bikers' lighter machines danced through the terrain with the grace of old war horses. Sarah's voice cut through via a quick radio crackle, her tone calm amid the chaos. "Split at the fork. Half draw them off, half to the safe house." Ethan acknowledged with a thumbs up, peeling left with Tyler and a few others, their taillights winking out into the underbrush like fireflies evading a storm. Jacob pressed on with Lily, Sarah and Noah, the path narrowing until the river's murmur grew louder on their right, its waters dark and sluggish under the emerging moon. The safe house was an abandoned ranger cabin tucked into a copse of pines, its weathered logs blending with the night like a forgotten sentinel. They arrived under cover of full dark, the moon's silver glow filtering through branches to dapple the ground in shifting patterns. Jacob killed the engine, the sudden silence profound, broken only by the soft patter of Lily's feet as she dismounted and scanned the tree line, hands poised in instinctive signs of vigilance. Sarah secured the bikes with chains from her pack, her movements efficient, while Noah built a low fire in a pit ringed with stones, the flames crackling softly and casting warm flickers across their faces. The air here was cleaner, laced with pine resin and the cool damp of moss, a brief respite from the mill's poison. Inside, the cabin smelled of aged wood and faint mildew. Its single room, furnished with cots and a scarred table that had seen its share of clandestine maps. Jacob spread the documents under the lantern's glow, the papers whispering as they unfolded. Manifests stained with coffee rings, invoices coded in euphemisms for bribes, Marcus's notes scrawled in hasty ink. They're dumping it straight into the water. Families downriver sick, Cain knows. Arlen covers. If I don't make it, tell Lily. Keep singing. Lily's eyes brimmed as she traced the words, her fingers lingering on her father's name. Then she pulled out her notebook, adding strokes to the silent song. Swirling notes that captured the river's tainted flow, a crescendo of hidden grief rising to defiance. Ethan's group rendezvoused an hour later, dust-caked and exhilarated, the deputies shaken off but likely regrouping. Over mugs of steaming coffee brewed on the fire, the crew huddled, faces etched with the lines of shared purpose. "They'll come harder now," Ethan said, his voice a low rumble that Jacob read from the flicker of firelight on his lips. "Cain's not just a mill boss. He's got ties up the chain, officials who've buried reports of the sickness. Kids with rashes, elders coughing black phlegm. Marcus was the spark, Lily's the flame." Sarah nodded, unpacking her medkit to tend a scrape on Noah's arm, her touch gentle but sure. "We expose this. It's not just justice, it's redemption for all the silences we've carried." Lily listened, her hands weaving through the air in fluid response, sketching symbols on a scrap of paper that the group passed around. Paths to the county seat, icons for allies in nearby towns, veterans' networks, honest journalists who'd trade favors for truth. Jacob watched her, the toughest edges of his heart softening further. Tears from that dawn encounter now a distant echo, but the emotion raw still. He'd cried then in front of strangers, moved by her unvoiced strength. Now, in this circle of chosen family, he felt the full weight of the vow, to his brother, to her, to the voiceless currents of the river itself. "We ride at first light," he said, voice gravel steady. "Deliver the proof where it counts, no turning back." But as the fire died to embers, a low rumble pierced the night. Not engines, but thunder rolling in from the west, promising rain that would turn roads to mire and secrets to slip. Lily stepped outside, tilting her face to the sky, hands conducting the wind's prelude to her song. Jacob joined her, the cool air brushing his skin like a benediction. In the distance, headlights pierced the gloom, more than patrols, a convoy of their own making, whispers of the oath spreading to draw reinforcements. The storm brewed, mirroring the one within. Corruption's grasp tightening, loyalty's resolve unbreaking. As rain began to spit, cold and insistent, Jacob placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, feeling the quiet power there. The silent song wasn't just hers anymore, it was theirs. A melody of honor, rising against the roar, carrying them toward the dawn, where truths would shatter chains. Rain lashed the cabin's tin roof like a relentless drumbeat, turning the night into a symphony of patters and sighs that Jacob felt more than heard, the vibrations seeping through the walls like echoes of battles long past. The fire's embers glowed faintly in the grate, casting wavering shadows across the faces of the Iron Oath crew, their expressions a mosaic of weariness and unyielding resolve. Lily sat cross-legged on a threadbare rug, her notebook open in her lap, fingers etching final flourishes to the silent song, notes that swelled like the storm outside, capturing the river's fury and the quiet roar of justice stirring. Jacob leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his leather vest, the scent of wet pine and damp earth clinging to his clothes, mingling with the faint, comforting smoke from the dying flames. Ethan paced the creaky floorboards, his boots leaving muddy prints, voice a low murmur that Jacob caught in fragments. Reinforcements en route from the next county over, a dozen more riders who'd heard the call through the Oath's underground wires. "They'll meet us at the crossroads by dawn," he said, glancing at the map pinned to the wall with a knife blade, its edges curling in the humidity. Sarah tended to the group's minor aches, bandaging a cut on Tyler's knuckles from the evasion ride. Her hands steady as she worked, a former nurse's calm anchoring the tension. Noah stoked the embers with a poker, sparks dancing upward like fleeting hopes, while Lily's eyes met Jacob's across the room, her hands signing a simple "together." The gesture sealing their bond tighter than any oath sworn in blood. The storm peaked around midnight, thunder rumbling like distant artillery, shaking the cabin's foundations and flooding the creek beds with churning waters that mirrored the turmoil in Jacob's chest. He stepped out onto the sagging porch, rain sluicing off the eaves in silver sheets, the air alive with ozone and the raw petrichor of soaked soil. Lily followed, pulling her jacket hood up, the downpour soaking her curls as she tilted her face skyward, hands conducting the chaos, palms slicing through the air in arcs that evoked her melody's climax, a silent defiance against the deluge. Jacob watched, the toughest biker in any bar now humbled by her grace, remembering the tears that had cracked his facade back at the motel, born from the purity of her unvoiced strength. His brother's promise, whispered under that blood moon so many years ago, felt alive here in the storm's embrace. Protect the quiet ones, let their songs be heard. Dawn broke grey and sodden, the rain easing to a misty drizzle that veiled the world in soft focus, turning the pines into ghostly sentinels. The crew mounted up as the first reinforcements arrived, a rumble of engines cresting the hill, headlights cutting through the fog like beacons. 20 strong now, the Oath swelled with fresh faces, grizzled riders with war stories etched in their eyes. A mechanic named Ryan, whose hands bore the scars of engine rebuilds, and a sharp-eyed woman called Grace, a journalist ally who'd smuggled files from city halls before. They exchanged nods and grips, no words needed. Loyalty flowed like the river they'd come to cleanse, chosen family forging ahead where blood ties faltered. The convoy rolled out in tight formation, tires hissing on wet asphalt, the highway a glistening ribbon snaking toward the county seat. A modest courthouse perched on a bluff overlooking the valley, its white columns stark against the overcast sky. Jacob rode point with Lily, her arms secure around his waist, the Harley's growl a steady heartbeat beneath them. The documents rode in a waterproof pouch strapped to his tank, Marcus's note folded inside like a talisman, its ink smudged but unyielding. Flanking them, Ethan and Sarah scanned the mirrors for tails, the mist carrying the faint, hopeful scent of wet wildflowers pushing through the cracks of the roadside. They arrived unannounced, the bikes pulling up in a disciplined arc before the courthouse steps, engines idling to a collective purr that drew stares from early clerks and passers-by. The sheriff's office loomed adjacent, windows dark, but Jacob spotted movement. Deputy Harlan's cruiser idling in the lot, the man himself stepping out with a scowl, radio in hand. No full assault. This was a presentation of truth, not a siege. Jacob dismounted first, helping Lily down, her notebook in hand as she signed to the gathering crowd. Justice for the silent. The crew formed a loose perimeter, leather and chrome, a silent testament to their unity, while Grace approached the steps, her press badge glinting as she called out to the emerging judge, a stern woman named Eliza, robes hastily donned. "Your Honor," Grace began, voice carrying clear over the drizzle, "we have evidence of environmental crimes at the Valley Mill, illegal dumping poisoning the river, bribes to cover it up. A man's life hangs in the balance." She held up the manifests, the papers crisp despite the weather, as Ethan and Sarah flanked her, detailing the sickness rippling through downriver communities. Families afflicted, waters tainted, all tied to Victor Kane's ledgers and Harlan's signatures. Jacob stepped forward, Lily at his side, unfolding Marcus's note for the judge to see. "He didn't run," Jacob said, his gravel voice steady, the words piercing the mist like a vow renewed. "They silenced him, for her." Lily held up her notebook then. The silent song's pages fanned out, lines that wove the river's lament into a crescendo of revelation, evoking the hidden pains now laid bare. Harlan lunged from the steps, face twisted in denial, but the judge's gavel cracked like thunder, halting him mid-stride. "Deputy, stand down. This court will hear every word." Whispers spread among the onlookers, locals drawn by the engine's arrival, their faces lighting with long-suppressed hope as the evidence piled up. Manifests, invoices, even a hurried confession from one of the mill guards who'd tailed the bikers but switched sides at the sight of unyielding honor. Kane arrived in a sleek car, suit rumpled, but the web unraveled before him. Arrest warrants issued on the spot. The sheriff's office raided under the judge's watchful eye. No shots fired, no fists thrown, justice unfolded like a slow dawn, poetic in its precision, the corruption's shadows fleeing before the light of truth. As the sun pierced the clouds, bathing the bluff in golden warmth, Marcus was found, alive, hidden in a remote cabin by Kane's men, weakened but unbroken, his first sign to Lily a tearful, "I'm here." Father and daughter embraced amid the dispersing crowd, her silent song now a bridge mending what the world had torn. Jacob stood back, the crew at his shoulders, feeling Daniel's presence in the breeze. A promise fulfilled, redemption washing over him like the rain had cleansed the earth. Tears traced his cheeks again, unashamed, as Lily turned to him, hands signing, "Thank you, Guardian." The oath mounted up one last time, engines roaring farewell, riding into the horizon not as outlaws, but as legends of quiet courage. In the valley below, the river ran clearer, its currents carrying whispers of change, a moral victory etched in honor's legacy, where one girl's silent song had rallied the unbreakable, proving that promises once kept echo forever. Thank you for riding this journey with us. If these tales of redemption and loyalty touch your soul, please subscribe for more stories that honor the heart's quiet strength.